and say hello and wave. If you're here, presumably. Bill Myers is not here. Is Darren Hutchings here? No. Okay. Sandy Grukowitz. Sandy's going to be speaking tonight also. Welcome, Sandy. Tim Jarsky, is he here? No. Okay. And Jess had an emergency. She had to take care, help some close friends, and of course I'm here. And then departing is Jeff Laughley, who has been secretary and president and many other things. Jeff, would you like to unmute yourself and just say a couple words?
Sure. What a ride. I actually have a serious question. If Jess had to depart, who's taking notes? Is anybody?
Well, we're recording the meeting.
Okay.
We're recording the meeting. And
okay.
she did tell me that it was kind of an emergency.
All right. Okay. No, I would just say that it's, been a very enjoyable and productive stint that I've had on the board and, for quite a few years, and then in office as president, first vice president, and secretary. Yeah, I mean, this has been an awesome group to work with, and it's changed over the years, and it remains awesome even as it rolls along. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for your service to our group and Watershed. Dan Keefe is departing as president, and we're very grateful to him as well. Do you want to say a couple words, Dan?
Yeah, I can't say much more than what Jeff said. I mean, it really has been a great ride, even though I had some doubts and anxiety about doing this. I couldn't have been with a better group of people, more cooperative, more energetic, with great ideas, and just wanting to take good care of the watershed. You can tell that was first and foremost in everybody's mind, and I couldn't have been more fortunate to have landed here in Seattle, real close to Kramer Creek, and then real close to the South Fork. And I'm an aquatic ecologist by training, and I'm going, boy, I landed pretty good. And then getting involved with Thornton Creek Alliance was just a bonus. So carry on. Good luck. I'll be gone far.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, good. That's good to know. So now we'll move on to our first speaker, Sandy Shetler. And Sandy is going to talk about saving our watershed trees. Sandy has a master's of social work, and she is a medical social worker who understands the interdependency of people and a healthy urban forest. And she is with Tree Action Seattle, the Last 600, and Tree Pack. And I think with is an understatement. I think I'm probably leading and co-leading is a better description for all of Sandy's work. Anyway, go ahead, Sandy, and thanks for coming.
One quick just note for folks. If you have any questions for Sandy as she's going through the presentation, write it in the chat, and then we'll address those at the appropriate times. Thank you.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, super. And I just had one correction. It's actually the last 6,000 because it refers to the number of trees over 30 inches in diameter in the city. So we're glad it's not 600. So anyway, thank you, Ruth. Yeah, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen now. Okay. Sorry, there we go. How's that looking?
Not seeing it yet.
Oh, great. I'm sorry. We practiced this too.
There
Share.
we go. Now we're going.
Okay, super. Slideshow from beginning. Okay, how's that? Does that look good?
Looks good.
Okay, super. Yeah, so this is, so I'm going to talk about our urban trees, primarily the ones on private property. So Seattle's majestic urban forest, saving it. Some of this is really basic. I think everybody here agrees that we get so many services from these trees. These are just a few. carbon removal, heat mitigation, human health, and that's been the area that I've been most interested in since I worked in public health for so long. There's so much data about people's health. One of the fun facts is that Seattle Children's did a study recently that shows that the essences that evergreen trees emit, which are called phytonicides, if you spend 2 hours around an evergreen tree and absorb those, your own natural killer cells, which are the cells in your body that combat cancer, are elevated for a full week. So everybody should go stand under an evergreen tree for at least 2 hours. So anyway, and then one of the things that I like to focus on here is the value of mature trees, particularly because Seattle policy has really focused on planting new trees, removing and replanting as a primary method to maintain and grow the urban forest. We'll talk a little bit later about why that doesn't work, but mature trees, not only are they better at what they do, which is carbon sequestration, and then all of those ecosystem benefits that this group knows so well, but as they grow older, they become much more efficient. So when you see there, it says 2.5 times more carbon sequestration, it's per inch of trunk. So a 30-inch diameter tree is not the same as 30 trees with 1-inch diameter. It's 2.5 times more efficient. And one thing that's not on this slide is that urban trees, ironically, even though they're in more difficult settings, are actually more efficient at sequestering carbon than trees in the forest. That we're not sure why that is, but one of the obvious reasons it may be that there's more carbon around to sequester. But in any case, our urban trees are super hardworking, valuable trees, and the mature trees are the ones that we most value. I also pointed out here that as we look at growing our urban forest, having large trees present to kind of nurture the smaller trees by providing cooling, sometimes if it's close enough, support through the underground mycorrhizal network, those things are a boost to our future trees that we're trying to grow. Now we're getting into the meat of the problem, and it's essentially a math problem. We're losing about 4,000 trees a year, and those are trees that have trunks 6 inches in diameter or greater. And that's a compilation of what we can track, which is we track the notices of tree work that Seattle's building department issues to remove trees on private property. And then we also track some of the trees that are removed through the street trees. We lose about 500 to 800 street trees per year, so not all of which are replaced. We lose trees illegally. I realized I should have talked about who's managing our trees, and I'm sorry that's not on here. I'll get to it later, but basically, sorry, it's a digression. So we've got trees on private property, street trees. We have illegally removed trees. We have about 300 of those that are confirmed to be illegally removed every year. But I know that from experience that they only end up finding a violation in a fraction of the cases of the actual complaints that are filed. So the Urban Forestry Commission has also looked at this, and we're looking at about 4,000 trees per year. We have volunteers who track the notices of legal tree removal. And for January, February, and March, not including April, we lost 445 significant trees. So I just wanted to show you guys, this is what the information looks like when it comes to me from the volunteers who are tracking this. You'll see here, we've got the address, we've got the species, and we have the trunk size. And my daughter put this slide together and she said, okay, there's 37 this week, but if you'll notice the dates, it's actually only over 3 days. These were notices that were filed from April 17th to April 20th. So in 3 days, we're removing 37 trees. These notices are pretty easy to look up, and you can also look up which tree provider is doing it and that kind of thing. But this is what I look at every week and I look for the big trees because those are the ones that are the most valuable, and I want to see why they're being removed. And you can see on this list, there's a number here, like especially here, 43-inch diameter incense cedar and a white pine in Greenwood, and that is a development site. And then this is a different month, but we wanted to map out the data of tree loss because, you know, it's easy to say, oh, it's only happening in certain areas, but we do this almost every month, and pretty much every month it is spread across the city. There's really no area that is exempt from pretty aggressive tree removal. Over here, you can see there was a lot around Roosevelt. Roosevelt is a new urban heat island. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. This was last July, actually, this data. And the other thing I wanted to point out is there's not much here. This is downtown, Chinatown International District, Beacon Hill, and Georgetown and South Park. Those are areas that have the least amount of canopy. South Park, for example, only has 11% tree canopy, whereas the city average is 28.1. So they have fewer trees to lose. And unfortunately, we found that a much larger share of their removals are actually illegal. So this is showing, you know, there's not as many trees, and then there weren't that many notices turned in for those really decanopied, deforested areas. This is a heat map that was done in 2021 by the King County Public Health Department. And it's really kind of telling because it maps perfectly with where trees are. Seattle is number 5 in the nation for urban heat islands. And so what that means, it's not that we have the absolute hottest city, you know, compared to Phoenix or places like that, but it's the differential between the built environment and the natural environment. So it's really a proxy for good development. If you've got good development that integrates green space and is thoughtfully designed, you're just not going to have as bad of a heat island as what we are having. And you'll notice that these areas that I just mentioned to you, South Park, Georgetown, Beacon Hill, they are all far and away hotter than the rest of the city. But what's interesting too is that in the last 3 years, we've created 2 new urban heat islands where the light rail's gone in, from tree removals for the light rail, but also for development around the light rail that doesn't incorporate trees. And urban heat islands are extremely unhealthy for humans. They are directly unhealthy in fatalities, you know, during a heat dome or even just a moderate heat spike. We have fatalities associated with that. Mostly people that are either don't have homes, or they have extremely hot homes and are elderly and they can't get out. So it's really our most vulnerable residents who suffer the most during these heat waves. And they are not getting a break from tree removals. And I can talk about that a little bit later. So we're going in the wrong direction. We are losing trees. As I think everybody here knows about the 2021 tree canopy study. That study showed that we lost 255 acres of trees. And one thing that's important to remember about that study is that they used LIDAR, which is a type of data collection, laser data collection, but they measured it at the 8-foot level. So when you look at Seattle and they say it's 28.1% tree canopy, it's 28.1% at 8 feet. And so just think about rhododendrons, camellias, all these small plants that aren't really providing the value of a tree, and yet they're being counted as a tree. So the 2021 canopy study, the conclusion that was drawn in that by the city when they did that canopy study was that they said tree development has little or nothing to do with tree loss. That is kind of an alarming statement, and we looked really closely at the data, and even though the statement in the summary said development had little or nothing to do with tree loss, the numbers in the study told the truth. And the numbers showed that on lots that were being developed, trees were 20 times more likely to be cut down than anywhere else. So, but we've identified really two big reasons why we're losing our trees. One is the tree ordinance doesn't protect trees. The other one is our trees are hens guarded by the foxes in our city building department. And as most people here probably know, Seattle's trees are managed by a multitude of different agencies, 9 different agencies, but the bulk of them are on private property and are managed by our building department. So first I'll talk a little bit about the ordinance. We had an ordinance that was put, well, it was sort of a temporary ordinance that was established in 2009 that the city operated under for over a decade. And it had some flaws in it, but the biggest flaw was that it was not enforced. So we often have said that if that old ordinance had been enforced, we would probably have a lot more trees than we have right now. But nevertheless, there was a push to tighten up the ordinance and, of course, really grow on the enforcement piece, because that was a huge problem. Unfortunately, this ordinance that was passed in May of 2023 did not. It actually is worse than the ordinance that we had before. It essentially is 2 ordinances. One is for homeowners, and it's pretty heavily regulates what a homeowner can do on their own personal property. But it also, but the other piece of it is the piece for development. It's an entirely different ordinance for developers that essentially lets them cut down all trees on lots under development with either a modest fee that goes to replace the tree somewhere else, or they can do a planting on site, but they often plant much smaller trees. So these are some of the headlines we pulled when that ordinance passed. Alex Peterson said a death sentence for hundreds of trees, which I think is probably the best way to phrase it. And then this is the process. This is why we got the ordinance that we got. You can go on the Seattle City website, and there's a place where lobbying reports are filed. And we discovered that the developer lobby, which is called MBACS, Master Builders Association of King and Snohomish County, they between January of 2023 and May of 2023, they had 108 meetings with Seattle city officials, both elected and staff. 37 of them were specifically about the ordinance. And then Seattle has an urban forestry commission, which is a panel of volunteer subject matter experts who are tasked with advising the city on forestry policy. And they got 3 meetings, and they were very short meetings. So the input into the ordinance was primarily from the developer lobby. These pictures here were taken the night that the ordinance was signed by Mayor Harrell. A party was held downtown. It was not open to the public, but a reporter attended because they found out about it. And this is a picture of, this one here is Marco Lowe. He is the mayor's COO, Chief Operating Officer for the city. And he used to work for the master builders for many years. And then this is Alicia Ruiz. She is the main lobbyist for the master builders. And they got awards that were in the form of these little trees. And this is former council member Andrew Lewis with his award at that party. Okay, so that's the ordinance. And now this is SDCI itself. So that's Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections. They manage what we know. Oh, did you have a question? Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought I heard something. They manage our urban forest. 47% of our urban forest is on private property, but another 23% of all of our trees are in the public right-of-way, mostly in planting strips along private property. So what they do on private property with construction has a very direct impact on street trees. So when you add in the 47 and the 23, you're basically at 70% of our trees are basically at risk from their management by the building department. The building department, SDCI, is funded entirely by developer permits, and they have about 460 employees, and only 2 of them are arborists. So they've got this enormous, the bulk of our urban canopy is in the hands of 2, I call them the 2 exhausted arborists, because they've got, you know, so much to do. And at this point, I really think that they can only just rubber stamp things that come through. Anyway, so a group of us about 2 years ago started investigating why the enforcement of the tree code was so poor. And so we developed a report that's on our website. And essentially, these were our main findings from that report, which you can see, and I'll show you an example in a minute, is that they approve illegal removals, they contradict records and even alter them. And the biggest one is they close complaints with no investigation. Like, I can't tell you how many illegal removals you call in or write in on their website, and you just never hear anything again. And then this is just one example that you could see on the report. This is in West Seattle. This property has actually 5 protected trees, 5 exceptional trees on it. And they were all removed, except this one was mostly removed, and then they had to leave it because of our complaint. But basically, these 5 exceptional trees were noted on the property survey when the developer bought the property, and it was filed on the SDCI portal. When Kirsty found that they were being removed and she turned in the complaint, they changed the entire document, and they turned 5 exceptional trees into 3 small trees. So here we have the violation is confirmed, placed a stop work order, then inexplicably, less than a month later, 3 trees were removed. Removal of 3 trees is not a violation, even though they were all over the protected status. So that report's on our website. It's kind of wonky, but the main thrust of that report is that SDCI doesn't even follow the tree code in its own work. So bright spot is we know that we can develop housing and retain our trees at the same time, especially in Seattle, because we're looking at infill development, and trees are generally on the periphery of homes that are being demolished and replaced. So there's really no reason to remove them. But this is kind of why they're getting removed. We call this lot sprawl. So what we have, this is in the neighborhood residential zone, which is, you know, most of Wedgwood and around Thornton Creek. And so on a typical 5,000 square foot lot, you can build 3 homes. You can build it with a primary single family home, an attached accessory dwelling unit, and a detached accessory dwelling unit. And this is the way that these structures are currently being built. They're being pushed out as far away from each other as possible. And the reason for that is that they are more profitable to sell if they are detached and they kind of feel a little bit like their own home. So, but what happens when you do that is you do have to remove basically all the trees because you're pushing everything away from the center of the lot. So we're advocating for lot density, which is actually legal under current Seattle land use code. It's just that nobody chooses to do it. So this would be a more optimal design, and that's what we're arguing for. Now, of course, the comprehensive plan will make some of this a little bit moot because they're going to have to figure out a way to get 4 units. And I'm hoping they're not going to still allow them to all be spread out like that. So we'll have to see what develops. And then this is just a couple of inspirational projects. This was done by Ray Johnston Architects, and it's right by the cemetery that's up the hill from University Village. And it's beautiful. This was a commercial space. I think it was a school, and 2 homes were demolished, and they created 82 units of housing. And they were so thoughtful with their trees. But they didn't, what's really interesting about this is they did not have to use any innovative or strange techniques. It really is just calling in an arborist at the very beginning of the project and doing the tree plan up front. And so when that's done up front and the buildings are sited in such a way that the trees can be retained, it works. You don't have this issue later at the later stage in the process of having to suddenly remove a tree. That is not required in Seattle right now to do that planning up front. We're advocating for that. Right now, the developers frequently do an arborist report well along in the process after they've already subdivided the lot. They've put, they've got their drawings for their houses. They've had an architect do that. And it's obviously too late at that point. And this is also an equity issue because in neighborhoods that have no trees, if you don't plan for space for trees, they'll never get them because we're covering the lots with pavement. So it's not only planning and landscape plan up front for our existing trees, but it's to also plan for them for the future. And then this is a really fun project. This is in Matthews Beach, and it's actually open this weekend if you'd like to go see it on Saturday from 11 to 5. The Northwest Eco Building Guild is showing, you can go inside and see this home. But this was done by Bragdon Shields. He's a tree-loving architect, and the family that owns this home, this is in the backyard of a home. They wanted to build this. It's a pretty big cottage. It's actually another house for their family for when they get older. And they thought they'd have to take down these cedars here, but he gave it some thought and developed a plan. And it was actually a pretty inexpensive plan. There's this one section of foundation that is done with pin piles, which are those steel bars that they drive down, and so it basically holds up a little part of the foundation. They're not expensive. I actually have some of them at my own house holding up my porch. And then he had the residents of the home water the trees in this area to encourage the roots to grow away while they were waiting for their permit. And it's been there now for over a year, and the trees look great. So it's super inspiring, and I hope you guys get to go see it. It's free to go to that. And this is just a picture that I love. You may have heard about Luma, who was a tree that was occupied last summer by a tree sitter to save. And then Luma was saved. We call her Luma. And she was saved because the Snoqualmie tribe identified that she's a culturally modified tree. She was really not saved for any other reason. So obviously that's not something that we can apply to other trees very commonly, but we were so grateful. And this was a celebration party just to celebrate that she was being saved. Okay, and then here I've got how you can get involved. And here's our newsletter. We're about to upgrade our website, but we'd love to have you on our newsletter. We send something out just probably once every 6 weeks or so, and we're pretty active on our Instagram. And one thing that I did not mention here, but I'll put it in the chat, is that we, a group of us, of organizations, filed an appeal about the tree ordinance to the State Growth Management Board. We haven't heard the final word on that yet, but we are contending because we know that if we have this tree ordinance, Seattle will not reach its 30% canopy goal, which is in our existing comprehensive plan. And so those were the grounds that we appealed it. And we still have a little bit of legal debt for that action. And so I'll drop, it's not through Tree Action Seattle, but I'll drop that into the chat. If people want to donate, it would be very much appreciated to that effort. We've almost paid it off. We just need a little bit more. So anyway, yeah, that's all I have for now. I guess I'll stop sharing my screen. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Sandy. That was great. And the floor is open for questions if people would like to ask any questions about what you can do to save trees and how to be vigilant and how to report.
Yeah, I saw none in the chat, so.
Pardon? There's none in the chat, you said, Deb?
I went and looked at the chat. I didn't see anybody. I didn't see any questions.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Let me ask,
Yes.
Sandy. It just sounds so daunting, and I mean, I like how we combat this. I mean, if you've got the foxes watching the hens, is there any, I don't know, a Seattle Times reporter or how to bring the stories to the public? It seems like, you're sharing a lot of stuff that a lot of us don't know, and how that can get out more.
Yeah. I'm not, that's a good question. And I don't mean to be, I don't mean to be discouraging. And that's why we do we have individual actions that come up on a fairly regular basis that we put on our Instagram. So, we do still try to advocate for trees in development situations, but it's a lot less, there's a much lower chance of success now with projects that are being approved under the new tree ordinance, because there's very little wiggle room. So I'm putting all of my effort into basically lobbying city council and the mayor. And so that would be, that's where I'm putting my energy. And we do send things out on our Instagram when there's stuff that comes up. There's nothing right now that they're considering, but if they hear from us, it obviously increases the chances that they'll want to do something. I think most people here have heard of Astra, which is the cedar in Wedgwood that was going to be removed, and then the developer illegally girdled it ahead of time. And in response to that, Maritza Rivera, because that's her district, she's really taken up looking at tree protection and looking at what she can do. So I think it's just, we're still at the grassroots level. But one ray of hope is that during the campaign last fall, trees were mentioned all the time. And I've done this for a few years, and this was the first campaign where I mean, it still crime, public safety, homelessness, housing affordability are probably the top three for people, but trees was always next. And there were a lot of questions at the candidate forums about that. So it's on their minds. But we're dealing with a council that, you know, they're new. And there's also Mayor Harrell's very popular, you know, and this is his policy. And so it's a bit of an uphill push. So yeah, so I think writing to our council member is probably the best thing to do. And then we do send out, you know, advocacy bulletins. I see a couple of other questions that, like, one of them is about the comprehensive plan, and Sandy G is going to talk about that, but it is super important that we get tree protection into the comprehensive plan, because it's not just the ordinance, but the ordinance will be baked in to the comprehensive plan. So for example, the comprehensive plan references the tree canopy study as if it's valid, you know, that we have 28.1% canopy. And I'm calling them out on it every time. I'm like, those are camellias and rhododendrons. We don't have 28% tree canopy. So so things like that, I'm not going to get into Sandy G's section, but those are the kind of things that we're looking at for trees in the comprehensive plan. And I see Steve put a good, he put in the deadline. Thank you, Steve. And someone answered the illegal tree cutting question. So, okay, I think that covers it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
First, Sandy, thank you for your presentation. It was absolutely excellent and short. I live in North Cedar Park, and if you looked at the Seattle Comprehensive Plan, they're going to wipe out Cedar Park. And it can be one of the most polluted places because we're downwind from 145th Street, which is a highway, and Lake City Way.
Wow.
Right now, we have a great number of trees in our neighborhood. And I don't think people realize what's coming or how to go about fighting it. When the Elks Club just north of us in Lake Forest Park was taken down, they did what you described. The developer was going to keep all these great old growth trees. And of course, every single one of them's gone now. That was in Lake Forest Park City, so it wasn't City of Seattle. And when you read the environmental impact statements, it's like they're almost paid off by the developers. It was really a shame. So thank you for what you're doing. Is it possible to get a copy of your presentation? I'd love to send it to my neighbors. I have a big neighborhood group.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I'll definitely send it to you. Yeah.
Okay.
If you put your email in the chat or something.
I'll do that now. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Great. Wow. Thank you, Victoria, for your interest, and thank you, Sandy. So Janet Heineck is here. I don't see her anyway. She's a new board member, and she could say hello, but I don't see her responding. Okay. Well, thanks again, Sandy. That was very enlightening. And did we cover all the questions?
I think so.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. So next up is Sandy Gerkowitz, and Sandy's background is a little bit different from Sandy Shetler's. And so Sandy Gerkowitz is going to talk about responding to the One Seattle plan, the new comp plan. And she's recently retired City of Seattle employee. She worked for SDOT for over 20 years as the department's environmental manager and strategic advisor. In this capacity, she ensured that SDOT projects were in compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and the State Environmental Policy Act, SEPA, and federal, state, and local permitting. She coordinated the review of many large SDOT projects with sister city departments, state agencies, and several federal agencies. On a personal note, Sandy has been paying attention to the way Seattle is developing and the impacts of development on our neighborhoods. She's not sure that smart growth movement is really so smart. So thank you, Sandy.
Welcome. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to Sandy S. We call Sandy. I'm Sandy G and Sandy S because I am very concerned about the loss of the tree canopy. And I have one of the projects I worked on, so the Northgate pedestrian bridge, whatever its name is, and it had a tree mitigation plan. And I told people should take a look. I don't know if they, and unfortunately it was for replanting. They did affect a wetland area. I don't know if it's been replanted. It's something to follow up on. I haven't been on the bridge lately, but they removed 200 trees and we're supposed to plant 440 or something like that. It was amazing because and some of it on the north, most of it would be replanted on the North Seattle campus because they had that beautiful little forested area. And then, so I'm a tree advocate and always have been, and I am totally discouraged by what's going on around Seattle. I moved to Seattle from Los Angeles and wanted trees. So moved to Northwest because of that. Thank you very much, Ron, for doing my presentation. So I'm going to talk today about, so I'm going to start talking about commenting on the One Seattle plan. The questions that were raised are very, very good ones. And I think some people have an idea of what's going to happen. I'm not sure if everybody has an idea of what's going to happen or even what we're reviewing. So my talk started out, how do you comment? What do you comment on? What are the areas? But it's taken a little different turn. I'm going to start talking about really kind of what's in the plan. I might even mention what I would comment on and what I'm looking at for Thornton Creek Alliance's comments and other documents and things that are related. So next slide, please. So I don't know if everybody is aware, but until a few days ago, I really wasn't aware that there are actually 3 documents being reviewed concurrently and all related to the draft One Seattle plan. I knew about the plan. I knew about the draft environmental impact statement, that draft EIS on the right, but I didn't know about this middle report updating the neighborhood residential zones report. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in the draft plan, what's in the neighborhood residential or NR zones report, and then the draft EIS, how they link together and how you can comment on those. So this is my new, and I hope it's helpful to people. And I'm imagining some folks have seen one or the other of these documents and maybe not all 3 of them, but really all 3 should be, if you can look at them concurrently, or at least pieces of them concurrently, because they intertwine. Next slide, please. So I'm sure everybody knows, but for those of you who don't, maybe many people don't know what the draft One Seattle plan is. It's a comprehensive plan update. We have a current comprehensive plan, Seattle 2035, that talks about where growth and housing and jobs are going to be located. Talks about transportation linkages, where parks and utilities will be located. It's based on projected population growth and job growth, not just within the city, but within the state. And there are organizations, region-wide organizations, PSRC, Puget Sound Regional Council, that helps allocate this along with the state. City of Seattle, as I understand from the comp plan, is we were allocated 80,000 housing units and 168,000 jobs over the next 20 years. That's what the projected growth would be. And that's what the draft plan dances around. Next slide, please. So we kind of know what this plan is, what's in it. I don't know if anybody's taken a look at it, the thing in its entirety, but it's pretty big. It consists of 13 key policy elements, and each policy element has a goal and then policies that go underneath each element. And in this new plan, they're built around 4 key themes, or they call them key moves, because this is the direction we want to move Seattle in. There's housing and affordability, which is weighing on everybody's mind. Equity and opportunity. How do we make development more equitable? I think we found over the past that the existing growth nodes are not developing equitably. There are places in the South are not developing in the same way as the North, and opportunities are not the same in terms of jobs. They're looking at community and neighborhoods, looking at making walkable and healthy neighborhoods, and then looking at what about climate change and sustainability. So these 13 key policy elements build on that. There's future land use maps included, and then several appendices. Next slide, please. So what I find is of these 13 key policy elements, the most important thing that I've been reviewing is the growth strategy. It is quite a departure from the previous comp plan. Sandy alluded to the fact that growth in the Wedgwood neighborhood would now allow require 4 houses per lot, and depending on the size of the lot. I think that, I don't know what Wedgwood is zoned, it's a residential neighborhood, I don't know what it's zoned. My area up in Meadowbrook is lots are 7,200 square feet. So if somebody was to develop this, demolish my house and develop this land, they would probably have to put 6 units on this piece of property versus the 1. So the growth strategy, we're going to look at that a little bit, because I think it's really important to understand that before you can even go and look at the environmental impact statement. And of course, there's a new section on climate and environment that all I'll say is, I hope people review it, but I found very little, if anything, on the tree canopy and its contributions to sustainability and the environment. This thing is very long. Each section is very long, but the growth strategy has a lot of pictures to it, so you can see what they're talking about in the policies. The rest of it, I'm the transportation planner and urban environmental planner, and I haven't even had a chance to really review transportation because I'm focusing on these other areas. Next slide, please. So what the growth strategy does, the change in the growth strategy, the current growth strategy has 2 place types they call. There's a urban center and urban village concept. And they, Northgate is what we would envision as an urban center. Downtown is an urban center and an urban village. I think is Ballard may be considered an urban village, a little smaller. These are areas that are allow very dense development, and urban centers typically around transportation modes. I'm not quite sure. Urban villages are smaller and around, maybe not around like a regional transit center, but has more bus and more commercial zoning in that area. The new strategy adds 2 more categories to these place types. They're calling now what we're calling urban centers, they're called regional centers. And then the urban villages are now called urban centers. And each of those areas, again, they tell you how much that their prescription on height limitations, and again, and density, how many units per square foot, or how many units per lot. It's changing. And there's 2 new things one's called the neighborhood center, which is a smaller area where there's sort of core area of businesses, core area of businesses, and maybe recreational areas. Wedgwood is one such area. And what that new place type will allow is development, and I think around 1 to 3 blocks from the core, dense development, meaning apartments and different types of very high density housing. The rest of the city, and I think you can see it on this map, the light yellow is neighborhood zoning, and it's called urban neighborhood. It's residential, it's all residential. And it's in these areas all through the city where 4 to 6 houses will be required for new development. Next slide, please. So what does the growth strategy look like? The plan includes growth strategy by council district. This one, I think you can see the little blue blob on the north is Wedgwood. The left, I think, is Ravenna, the sort of little triangle of spots. And the bottom, I'm not sure if that's Sandpoint or not. I can't really see that. Next slide, please. And here's what it will look like in Council District 5. It looks like up, you can see Lake City Way is now an urban center. They're going to expand Northgate. There's a new urban center in near the light rail station, 130th and around 5th Avenue. And then it shows expansion further to the west of existing urban centers. Next slide. So I wanted to say, what I would review in the draft one Seattle plan is the growth strategy, the land use. So you have in the plan, you have these different place types, and each of them will require change in zoning, particularly the neighborhood, the urban neighborhoods, because to allow this expansive growth. So some of that is documented in this document called Updating Neighborhood Residential Zone Report. What that shows is, what this report shows is what the density will look like. It talks about some of the changes in the zoning. And on its face, one would think that is not that important, except that it will be the basis for the zoning changes and the regulatory changes that follow, and the development standards that follow. I didn't know about this report until recently. I think it's another thing that should be reviewed as well. Next slide, please. So what's in the report? I said it's a zoning proposal, and mostly describes the changes in the neighborhood residential zones. It's also meeting the requirement of, I think it's House Bill 1101, the middle housing proposal. And again, as I said, in this area of the city, which is most of the city, increases the number of units, 4 to 6 allowed. Actually required, it's not allowed. And it applies to all residential neighborhood zones. I see things in the chat going by, and I'm sorry, I can't pay attention. I'll get to them later. I'm sorry, not that good at reading more than one thing, or talking and reading at the same time. Next slide. Here's something from, actually from the document. This is existing zoning, but this is what residential zoning will look like in the future if it needs to be densified. And the next slide, which is more of what detached housing will look like. There is a tree there, but not on that property. Actually, I see a small tree in the right-hand corner of the first lot. You know, take a step back before we move on to the next slide. What does this mean for the tree canopy? What does it mean for existing trees? I think it's pretty obvious what it means. If the lot size is, if the requirement of open space on a lot is reduced, which it is with any of this development, then what happens to the trees? And I think that's something we all need to comment on. I think many of us are commenting on that, but something to be aware of. Next slide, please. And the third document that's related to the plan is, of course, this draft environmental impact statement. And I'm guessing most folks are reviewing this. The draft environmental impact statement evaluates 5 alternatives for growth in the city, or 5 plan alternatives. And I would say upfront, not very well. It's the alternatives being, the first one's, excuse me, no action alternative, to keep things as growth as it's going in the existing urban centers and urban villages. And then alternative 1 adds a little bit, it adds another, I forget which one. It kind of incrementally, they add these place types. And the final alternative, however, is what's really in the plan. It's the most robust, where it incorporates these additional place types, and then the growth strategy for implementing the House bill that talks about it having 4 to 6 units per lot. The next slide, please. So other components of the EIS include an evaluation of impacts of the plan, of all these alternatives, on these 12 elements of the environment. I know that I've heard the comments on plants and animals. And again, that's one place where you would comment on what happens to the tree canopy and what happens to preservation of existing trees. Earth and water quality is one I've spent a lot of time on, because for Thornton Creek Alliance, there's a lot of proposals. They talk about increased pollutant generating surfaces, or increased cement, concrete, and nowhere did I see heat islands discussed, I think, and either in any of the sections. But earth and water quality would even look at mitigation for stormwater changes due to the loss of for more impervious surface.
Offer a
I'm sorry?
really deep examination of what constitutes the very causes of suffering. And that's what we've been talking about actually so far.
Yes. But the document doesn't do that. It proposes mitigation in the form of additional regulations. There's very little mitigation through this document, and particularly I'm interested in stormwater management and water quality. It also doesn't look at the relationship between this plan and the federal regulations. That's another comment. Next slide, please. So knowing that you need to look at all three of these documents, or I've been trying to look at all three of these documents. Now that I know there's a third one, how should you comment on the plan? And how should you comment on the report and on the DEIS? Well, there's some basic things you should follow, rules, I would say, if you can review them concurrently, as I've said, but make sure you comment on them separately. The couple of documents have different regulatory requirements, so they need to have separate comments. They can be similar comments, but just make sure they're sent to the right docket. At the end, I'll give you places where you can send the comments. Be clear and concise, more so than I'm verbalizing. If there's an issue, identify it. Best to comment by section or by the issue. Particularly on the DEIS, it's great to comment, chapter by chapter. Reference pages and sections. The more specific you can be, the better. Provide support for your comments. Just like Sandy was talking about the canopy study, being flawed. Cite that. Cite the canopy study was flawed, and therefore the conclusions from it in this document, are flawed as well. You need to reference laws, policies, regulations, any additional information to support. Also, I don't have down there is, if you have a solution, put that down, include that solution as well. Next slide. The DEIS is a little bit different. I'd say all of the above and then add some, because I'm very familiar with this process, more so than land use. The main thing you can appeal this document on is it adequate? And is it missing information or analysis? And are the analysis adequate? I think I reviewed many documents from Sound Transit, and that was always one of the things we would find is that they missed something. They missed a regulation, city regulation, whether that was intentional or not, I don't know, probably so, but hope there's no one here from Sound Transit. But we would definitely, you look for the adequacy, you look, are the significant impacts categorized accurately? Are they all identified? Especially unavoidable significant impacts. The whole document says there aren't any, basically, because they can mitigate through regulation. That's not okay. And they're not analyzed correctly. And finally, one thing I found with the DEIS is that it's really siloed. And I'm trying to make the links between the sections, because there's a whole topic that's not discussed at all, or not in light of cumulative impacts. And that's really what a 20-year plan should be looking at. What are the cumulative impacts of this plan? So if you can identify those in any of those topics and any of the topic areas, that's very important. And that's another way I'm looking at it. The next slide, please. Where to provide comments? Well, they're due on May. When are they due? They're due on May 6th by 5 p.m. And there are really two different places to send them. You can send an email to the draft One Seattle Plan with the first email address to One Seattle Comp Plan at seattle.gov, and the neighborhood residential report as well to them. The DEIS goes to a different place, to Jim Holmes. If you're going to mail it, put in the mail, or if you're going to email your comments, go to One Seattle Comp Plan at seattle.gov. I think that's all I had. I'm happy to answer any questions on any of these documents and how to comment. And this is available too if you're interested.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandy. This was very informative and daunting, but informative as well.
Well, I'm trying to, yeah, I didn't mean it to be daunting. And I know it was very hard. I spent a long time trying to get what I feel are the nuggets of what to review and how to look at these documents. And you can take the presentation down.
So Jeff has his hand up there, and there are several comments in the chat as well.
Thank you. I'd love to address them. I'm sorry. I really could. I saw them. They just kind of flew by. So I'm sorry. I didn't stop. Jeff.
No, I just put my hand up. So, excuse me, I should know the answer to this, but I realized I had not yet downloaded these documents. Am I correct in presuming that this is a SEPA DEIS and not a NEPA DEIS?
Yes.
Okay.
There's no federal money in this one.
Okay.
Dang, be a lot easier to review, a lot easier to comment on for me.
Yeah.
Oh, Sandy, do you have
Sandy?
your hand up?
Yeah, I had to just say, this is so awesome. Thank you, Sandy.
Oh.
And then I had a question about the mechanics of commenting, because I heard at another meeting that you could actually go in and comment on the document itself. Like you could, like as if you would do on a Word document. That's apparently one of the options. And then oh yeah, and then but I noticed the 3 email addresses at the end that you listed are all the same, and you just have to put in the subject line which document you're commenting on. Is that right?
No, I think the last one on the DEIS says Comp Plan DEIS/DEIS.
Oh, whoops. Okay, I took a picture of it. Okay, got it. All right. And then yeah. Oh, wait, no, it doesn't. Okay.
It didn't come out right?
No, that's okay. But at least we caught it. Yeah.
Maybe put the correct one in the chat, Sandy G.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. Let's go on to the next question. I'm going to look for it. Otherwise,
Okay.
send it. The link to the
Dan,
website.
are you looking at the chat there?
Yeah, I think John had a comment. Do you want to continue to comment, John, or did you about the number of houses on a lot being required or optional?
Optional.
Yeah, I guess I mean it seemed like in Sandy's verbal comments, she was saying that people would be required to build 4 to 6 units on any single family lot that would be redeveloped. But then in the PowerPoint, it said that was what would be, the state was requiring that to be allowed, which makes more sense and which is what I've always understood. So I was just wanting to see if that could be clarified.
I think that's a really good question. Does anybody else have the better answer? Steve, do you know? I think and I looked quickly through the legislation and I didn't look at it in detail, but it said must allow, I thought it said the city must allow, or jurisdictions must allow for development of this size in residential neighborhoods. But then I thought I read in the plan that they're going to require it. And I thought I read somewhere that it's required. If it's allowed, we have some wiggle room there in comments.
Like Steve Zenke's raising his hand, maybe he knows the answer on that.
Yeah, it's not it's not required that they do that by the state. What it is, the state says that the city has to let a builder, if they want to build 4 units, to be able to build those on a lot. And if it's within a quarter mile of frequent transit or light rail, they can build up to 6 units.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, okay, that's what
Thank
I
you.
had understood, thanks.
And you know, I haven't found yet, but there is a separate email for the draft EIS. So when we find it, we'll put it in the chat, but
I know, I can't, and yeah. I'm not finding, what is it? Can you put up the last slide? Let me see what it says, and we can. Gary, thank you, because I'm futzing around here and I'm not. I have a cat messing with my. So, oh dang. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah, well, I know it is. I'll get it. I may have to email it to folks. Any other questions while I'm, and I updated the slide too, so I'm so sorry.
Other questions for Sandy? Well, I have one question that is not quite environmental, but is it fair to ask why SDCI permitted the demolition of so many affordable units with no short-term plan in place to rehouse people that were being displaced by that?
You're asking me that question?
Yeah, that's just been kind of nagging me. I mean, we have this horrible housing problem and they demolished all the affordable units and people had to leave the city or go to the streets. I mean, it was like.
I'm with you. There's no rhyme or reason. I have no idea what, and I know which ones are you talking about? You know, I even think about the trailer court that was on, you know, Lake City Way.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I said, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. Makes no sense.
Okay. I'll keep asking.
Right, and maybe I can find out at SDCI who could have an answer for that, because I don't.
Okay. Any additional questions, comments?
I'm
So
I don't
we
have
go-
my video on, but Ruth, this is Muriel speaking here.
Hi there.
You hit the heart and soul of the displacement issue, because they're talking about mitigating it and slowing it down, but I don't know that what we need to ask is, what's the plan? What happens to somebody who's living in a property and presumably often a rental property that is being developed, and well, we're going to slow down displacement. Well, is there a requirement that housing be provided for people and then they are able to move back into the neighborhood that they've moved out of? Because that's one of the key things. People are moved away from friends, family, and often jobs.
Yeah, there is something, but it doesn't look like it's been very adequate. It wasn't well done. It wasn't well thought out.
Yeah.
just put into the chat the email for the
Thank
draft
you.
EIS. And you can always try to find it on the website if you don't write it down or lose it. But yeah, they don't make it easy to find these things. They're not,
No,
they don't want you to really comment, I think, that much.
Thank you, because I'm still looking for it on my phone. I was going to send it. So thank you for finding it for me. And I was going to say, and a couple of people wanted the slide deck. Maybe I can correct correct it first, but not just that email address, but you know, the interpretation of what the plan says regarding middle housing.
Yeah, there's been a lot of interest in
So
the
let me-
slides and in recording this meeting, having the recording available. So we'll definitely do it.
So yeah, but I'm happy to make these available. Let me update it and clean it up a little bit and then send it out. If that's okay. I
Yeah,
wanted to be
for sure.
I wanted to be correct. I'm new
Yeah.
to this. I never understood land use planning until a few years ago. My husband was a land use planner, but we were in Oregon and he worked on West Side Light Rail and he worked he worked all over urban growth boundary issues. And then when we came to Seattle, so I learned a little bit. So I understand the language, but I have to tell you that reviewing the plan is just, I'm going in circles for this. And then the DEIS is worse. It's just, and then not having them. Yeah, it's very confusing. Lots of information, and it's really hard to wrap your hands around it, wrap your brain around it. So I hope this helped guide people through it a little bit better.
Okay. Let's see, John, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I was curious, Anna. I know if it may still be a little premature since comments are not due until May 6th, I guess it was. But I believe you are drafting comments on behalf of Thornton Creek Alliance. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you share, I mean, even though they'll need to still go through, some refinement and debate, with the board and others, what are some of the most important comments that you right now would be proposing for Thornton Creek Alliance?
Well, one about the option, why do we need additional growth when they said 80,000, with this first county suggested how much growth we needed to plan for, and yet we're planning for a lot more. Where did those numbers come from? 120,000 or 100,000. I mean, it looks like the plan implements alternative 5, which plans for 120,000, so why that? And yet when you read the plan, they say we're only planning for 80,000. So there's an inconsistency there. Number one, there are lots of inconsistencies. As I was saying, I was looking through the water quality section of the DEIS. So how does that relate to what's going on in the plan? Where, I'm not understanding how they can come to this analysis when you don't even know which areas are going to develop, how they're going to develop. It's so general. So one, the generalities. Someone commented, I think it was Steve, telling me, you need to point out areas of speculation. Well, I think there's a lot of speculation. I just don't understand how a lot of these concepts were developed, and exactly where things are going to be. Land use map is really important, and it's so general. It's pretty odd. I noticed, I think it was in the DEIS, trees, big, huge issue. And I didn't have to flag them. They've been flagged, and we're going to cut and paste, and we're going to share our comments. Big thing, and not necessarily for Thornton Creek Alliance, but in general, what happened to neighborhoods? Neighborhoods were, neighborhood planning. I missed it. Did I miss it? Is it now called something else? What happened to all the in the 2035 plan? There's a whole section on neighborhood plan and how it fed into development of the comp plan. And working with each neighborhood, they would take elements and incorporate it. And the neighborhood plans are what sort of is the fabric of the neighborhood. And so did that just go away? That wasn't, so that was a biggie for me. And each of the neighborhoods, has a little different context. So that's just my impression right now. That's sort of the way I'm leaning. The whole area I'm trying to think of, as I said, the climate change and sustainability section and air quality, maybe they're not as, important to us, at Thornton Creek Alliance, but I think they're really important points. So I've kind of looked through the whole thing, and I have pages of notes, and right now my brain is swimming in again. What's in the DEIS? I was just looking at the zoning document recently, like the last couple days, and I'd seen those pictures. I went to the public meeting and didn't know what the heck that was about. I didn't connect the dots. It's not good.
Oh.
Carolyn's been waiting.
I was just going to say, Ann
Hand up for
Stevens
quite
has
a while.
Well, I just wanted to read Ann Stevens' comment.
Okay.
Chuck says time is short. And
Yeah.
Ann says the Urban Forestry Commission is working on comments, and their comments could be helpful for us too. Yeah. So whose hand is up?
Carolyn?
Caroline?
Carolyn's been up for quite a while.
Hi there, I'm Caroline and I live in the Maple Leaf neighborhood, and I had two questions or comments. One on the DEIS. My understanding is that the conclusion about the tree canopy that they made was that there was no significant adverse impact because yes, there would be a moderate reduction of mature trees while redeveloping already developed neighborhood lots, but that would be mitigated over time by replanting of new smaller trees, which to me seems to be a wholly inadequate response. And two, on the plan, if one of the priorities is trying to provide affordable housing across the board, I don't see any sort of incentive for developers or individual homeowners to be able to make that happen. What I am seeing in my neighborhood is that single family homes are sold, then raised, and developers come in and build very expensive luxury properties that do not qualify for affordable housing.
Yeah, I agree. Very excellent comments, and I'm sure I have, I noted that. What's affordability? So I even looked up the definition, and I think in the plan is it being less than 30% of your income for rent or a mortgage?
I think it's for affordable for housing, it's 60% of the annual median income or average median income, and for homeownership, it's 80%. But my understanding is that the real need for affordable housing is between that 30% and 60%, not even the 60 to 80.
I think you're right. I'm not sure. I have to dig into it. All I know is that I don't think a $500,000 or $600,000 home unit is affordable.
Oh, in our neighborhood, it's 850 to 1.2 million for one of the 3 units on a lot.
And those units don't claim to be affordable, right? So, but if the premise of the plan is that you increase the housing stock, increase the diversity of the housing stock, the prices are going to go down.
Yeah, my understanding is that is the premise, but I haven't seen any data that supports that premise.
Yeah, I haven't either, and that's another comment. You know,
Jeff. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sandy. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Reading.
Jeff, did you have a?
Yeah, did Steve have his hand up before me?
Oh, I'm not sure.
It was a tie.
Oh.
Okay, so a couple things. One is just a general observation. You were talking, Sandy, about how the question of how numbers such as water quality values or assumptions were made. And I think that would apply to a number of other aspects of this. If this draft EIS is basically considered a programmatic document, as opposed to what one might write for an individual project, and especially if you're talking about developments that you, as you say, you don't really know what's going to happen, then I think it might be hard to come up with those numbers. If you're talking about overall, say, numbers of trees that are expected to be removed or planted or whatever citywide, you know, I can see where it might be easier to derive those numbers. And I don't know if we can expect, if this is considered a programmatic document, that there would be much requirement under SEPA, because I just don't know, to write up individual SEPA documents for individual developments or localized developments. And I guess, so that's a question just to, and then I wanted to respond to a couple things that Caroline said. Caroline, you were talking about removal of trees, and Sandy Shetler touched on some numbers about the value of trees. You're absolutely right about the value of, you know, the contribution of trees that are replanted, new plantings and mitigation for removal of mature trees. It'll take decades for those trees, those new trees to start producing the value, the ecological contributions that a mature tree would. You know, just I heard it in a city council hearing once. Somebody made a really interesting comment. They said it's like you know, if you replace a city council member with 2 3-year-olds, you're not going to get the same performance.
Probably better.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
with affordable housing, yeah, that's what I'm seeing too, is a lot of single family housing replacing single family housing that's removed. I think there is a city requirement for affordable housing to be part of multifamily developments, but that can be done in 2 ways. One, that is that the developers can actually include affordable units, or they can contribute to a city fund for that. But it's not clear to me that that city fund is being exercised to actually come up with the numbers of affordable units that are needed.
Thank you. Steve, do you want to unmute and make your comment, or?
Yeah, I have my comments are several. The answer to the how long does it take to replace those trees is when we did the fight about 15 years ago to save trees on the Ingram School lot. One of the arborists, Michael Oxman, came up with asking the question repeatedly of the city, which they could only answer one way. It was, how long does it take to replace an 80-year-old Douglas fir tree you removed?
80 years.
I mean, it's very clear that within our lifetime, none of the big trees removed are going to be replaced in canopy. They also talk about just tree numbers, but again, we have small, medium, and large trees. If you remove the big trees that have a lot of canopy volume and you plant small trees, you could wind up getting the same canopy cover, but it in no way has the same benefit that you're looking at. One of the other issues that they're doing is they're avoiding looking at number impact, saying, well, we haven't completed the zoning yet. That's later in the process. Until we do that, zoning changes, we can't come up with numbers. I would say that's not true in the sense that they came up 2 years ago, and when there was the appeal, the master builders tried to void the initial law that was put out. The city came up with numbers of lots that are developable and the numbers of trees there were in the city in those lots. 6-inch trees, how many were 24-inch, how many were 30 inches. They have the capability of doing a lot more than they want to acknowledge. And so that information is out there. It's not something they can't do. They just don't want to do it. But I think the thing that will get you most, why I think all of you should be responding, is read the final summary in the plants and animal section of the draft EIS, and I will read you some sentences out of that, and you'll see why it's important, particularly from the Thornton Creek Alliance sense. They say, as discussed above, differences in the availability or distribution of habitats in the city would be unlikely to result in any appreciable impacts on regional populations of plants and animals. Now there's one key word there. They said regional. They didn't talk about Seattle. None of the alternatives are expected to result in impacts that would reduce the likelihood of survival or recovery of a plant or animal species. Again, the next 3 words, they say in the wild. They're not talking about the impact in Seattle. They're talking about a regional impact, saying Seattle can lose trees. We'll still have trees out in our state forest, et cetera. That's really what they're saying. And I think that's a sham on their part, because this should be a Seattle EIS. What's going to be the impact on the trees, the plants, the animals within Seattle? They continue, and here's the one, just one from your sense of Thornton Creek Alliance. It says, similarly, none of the action alternatives would be expected to have significant, unavoidable adverse impacts on aquatic species and habitats. None of the action alternatives would be expected to result in an appreciable increase compared to the no action alternative in the delivery of stormwater contaminants to fish-bearing streams. They continue, none of the action alternatives are expected to have significant unavoidable adverse impacts on tree canopy cover. City current tree protection regulations minimize the potential for development-related loss of canopy cover, and require mitigation for such tree loss. And while there were some good provisions in the update to the tree ordinance, they are basically negated by the provisions. One of them in particular, the obvious one, was the enlargement of the tree protection area, which unfortunately, when it was put in effect, they wrote into two parts of the ordinance different interpretations of that. One where the city could mitigate, the SDCI director could allow intrusion into the outer root zone. But then when they went into the next section of the ordinance dealing with the tree protection areas, they said, no, you can, these cannot be modified from that enlarged tree protection area. So it's a conflict in there. There are things like that in this ordinance that builders stuck in that negate the benefits that would be out there. The mitigation is fine in one sense because previously they never paid anything for taking out trees. They could take out up to 30-inch trees and have no cost, and they did that. This will at least put a cost on that they can, but again, the factor is the time frame and the survivability of trees. Not all trees planted survive. And again, 80-year-old tree is going to take 80 years to replace. People are used to saying, oh, 20 and 30 years. That's not true, as Sandy pointed out. The large trees continue to increase in their benefits over time. And I've read that also in scientific literature. So they're saying a lot of things that just aren't true here. And again, if you want to be motivated, read this, the final summary in the plants and animals section in the draft EIS. They're saying it's all right. We'll still have trees, plants and animals in the wild. We'll have them elsewhere, and it's good for the county and the state. But I don't need to say more. I think reading what I read says enough to motivate you.
Okay.
Steve, can you please share these differing root zones that the city has? There's a smaller one and now a larger one, which means more trees will get cut down because they have to allow a bigger root zone than before. I have not been able to find the documentation for that, and if you could share that, it would make our conversation stronger if we could document that.
Well, Portland has used the modification that we did, but they allow that alteration of the outer root zone. What was there was the drip line. That the drip line was the area that could not be gone into, and
He wants the verbiage from
yeah. So what they did in the draft was it was amendments that were introduced. There were 50 amendments introduced in the last 2 days that were like 100+ pages, expecting people to go through and deal with those. And so a decision was made by city council members that didn't know didn't read, I think, all this stuff, because that was a lot to read in 2 days. We had trouble getting through it in 2 days. The Urban Forestry Commission only got through half of it to respond to it. But that tree protection area was altered from the drip line to using a measurement of 1 inch in diameter of the tree equals 1 foot of radius. So if you had a 30-inch Doug fir tree, that would be a 30-inch radius, which would be a 60-foot diameter.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, any more questions for either of the Sandys? Or did we cover it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to clarify, Steve, you were talking about the tree ordinance just a minute ago, but want to relate it back to the DEIS, because I think if I understand what you were saying, is they're using existing ordinances as mitigation for the impacts of this plan, particularly for plants and animals. You know, they say we haven't, you're right, they're not addressing things in Seattle, but they're also saying that it's okay, all our ordinance, our regulations are protective. If you do the mitigation and the regulation, you've mitigated for the impact. That's how I'm reading DEIS. And so what you might say for your comment is, no, it's not effective, and here's why, particularly for trees.
Yeah, I mean, Sandy's been in the forefront of looking at these different projects along with some other people in terms of what trees can now be saved under the current ordinance. And my opinion is that almost no large trees can be saved on lots based on the way they're interpreting the new draft.
Yep.
And that draft is contrary to what the Northwest Arboriculture Society, as well as the National Arboriculture Society, says that can be done in terms of going into that outer root zone. They
Right,
put something in place that nobody else is using anywhere that I'm aware of.
So is there a way to wrap those comments into the DEIS comments, is what I'm saying, but I thought I heard you say.
Yeah, basically saying that there are problems with the existing tree ordinance that do not
Gotcha.
allow protection of trees.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's not,
They're giving a glib statement that, oh, we got more protection. I mean, what they did was they gave more protection, limiting what people can do on your property if you're not developing. But developers, they expanded their ability to remove trees rather than decreasing it.
okay.
I mean, this is complicated. I agree. You know,
I'm
this-
just trying to figure out, because in order how to incorporate into DEIS comments, that the mitigation they're proposing in the DEIS is not adequate because it's not adequate mitigation in the ordinance that you're proposing as mitigation. That's part of the comment. And I think, and I might be wrong.
No, they're making, I was mentioned earlier, they're making a statement saying our existing, the new tree ordinance is providing more protection for trees, including during development.
Gotcha.
During development is not true because they put loopholes in to allow them to remove more trees. And that over time, we will have mitigated the impacts of the tree removal. And again, no, it's
Gotcha.
decades, it's 80 years to replace. And I think everyone should use that to say, how can you say this is going to be mitigated when in your lifetime, it's not going to be mitigated? You can't remove an 80-year-old tree and take different numbers, so it's not all the same message.
I understand. It's a good, yep, yeah.
Yeah, so Sandy Shetler has written, I think Sandy's proposed comment hits the nail on the head. The mitigation is not to the scale of the loss. I mean, that's it right there in a nutshell.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're good.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody. It's been a great meeting. A
Yeah.
good first one for me to lead, I think. It's been really good to see everyone and have this conversation. So, yeah, so shall we call it a day?
Yeah, thank you very much. It was wonderful. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you, guys.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bruce,